Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the podcast that gets you smart fast on, well, sometimes pretty complex topics.
And today, it's definitely intriguing.
Yeah, today we're tackling something that pops up again and again.
Yeah.
The whole idea of Nazi UFOs. You pointed us to the Wikipedia page on this, and it's quite the rabbit hole.
It really is. You've got wartime accounts, genuine technological questions, and then it spirals into some pretty wild conspiracy theories.
Right, so our mission today basically is to unpack all of that. We want to look at the early links people made between weird stuff in the sky and German tech during and after World War II.
Exactly. And then explore how that morphed into these more elaborate stories about secret bases and occult connections, and try to understand why these ideas just stick around, you know?
Okay, so the basic concept, where did it start? It seems to stem from the fact that during the war and just after, people saw things they couldn't explain. And Germany was pretty advanced technologically, right? They had the V-1, the V-2 rockets, the Me-262 jet fighter, stuff that was way ahead of its time.
Absolutely. So it wasn't like a completely crazy leap for some people, especially Allied intelligence, to wonder, hang on, could this unexplained thing be some new secret German weapon?
Yeah, that context is key. They'd already been surprised by German tech.
Definitely. The fear was real. So anything unusual in the sky, it potentially looked threatening.
Let's start with the Foo Fighters. I love that name. What were pilots actually seeing back then?
Well, Foo Fighters was kind of a catch-all term, wasn't it? For these weird lights, balls of fire, metallic discs, things pilots saw that seemed to follow their aircraft.
On both sides of the war?
Yeah, Allied and Axis pilots reported them. Now, some were probably misidentifications, other planes, weather phenomena like St. Elmo's fire. Maybe even stress-induced hallucinations. Combat is intense.
But it wasn't all just dismissed, was it? The source says some reports were taken pretty seriously.
That's right. You had scientists like Luis Alvarez looking into it. Allied intelligence couldn't just ignore the possibility, given Germany's track record. Could this be a new radar jamming device? A psychological weapon? Or maybe an actual advanced aircraft?
That anxiety about what the Germans might have developed next must have been huge.
Exactly. It definitely colored how they interpreted these unknowns.
And the Wikipedia page mentions a few cases where Foo Fighters supposedly caused actual damage.
He does mention that, yeah. Minority of reports, but still.
Yeah.
If true, that suggests something more than just light phenomena. It certainly fed the speculation.
Okay, so that's Foo Fighters during the war. Then in 1946, we get the Ghost rockets, mostly over Sweden.
Primarily Sweden, yeah, and some nearby countries. These were described more like rockets or missiles.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of reports.
How many are we talking?
The page says around 2,000 sightings logged just between May and December 1946, which is, wow.
2,000. And some were even tracked on radar.
Yep, about 200 reportedly gave radar returns. And apparently, some physical fragments were even found, though the nature of those fragments is often debated.
Okay, fragments and radar hits. That moves it beyond just eyewitness accounts. What did people think they were at the time?
Well, the finger pointed towards the old German rocket base at Peenemünde. The thinking was maybe the Soviets, who'd captured German tech and scientists, were testing long-range missiles, maybe captured V-1s or V-2s, or even early cruise missiles.
Because some reports mention them maneuvering, right? Not just ballistic paths.
Exactly. That suggested something more sophisticated than a simple rocket.
And the Swedish military clamped down on reporting details.
They wanted to keep locations, directions, speeds quiet while they tried to figure it out. Standard procedure for a potential security threat, really.
But then there's the more mundane explanation.
Right. Meteors. Especially since a big spike in sightings coincided with the Perseid meteor shower in August 46. Statistically, that likely accounts for a lot of them.
But not all of them.
Probably not all. There were sightings outside the shower peaks, and those reports of controlled flight, well, they don't really fit with meteors. So the ghost rockets remain a bit of an enigma.
Okay, interesting. So the mystery continues. Now, fast forward a year to 1947, Kenneth Arnold's famous sighting, and the flying disc craze kicks off. How does the German tech idea resurface here?
It comes back pretty strongly. With everyone suddenly talking about flying saucers, people started looking for explanations again. And Germany's wartime research was a prime candidate.
Even official investigations looked into it.
Yeah, Project Sign, the first U.S. Air Force UFO group, specifically noted that some reports sounded similar to designs by the Horten brothers, these German engineers who were building really advanced flying wing aircraft.
Wow. And Captain Edward Rippold, who later ran Project Blue Book, he seemed to think along those lines too.
He did. He basically said that looking back at the end of WWII, The only man-made things known to exist that could even approach the performance described in some UFO reports were these advanced German aircraft and missile projects.
So the idea was bubbling up in military circles. When did it really hit the public consciousness that maybe the Nazis actually built flying saucers?
A key moment seems to be an article in an Italian newspaper, Il Giornale d'Italia, in early 1950. Professor Giuseppe Belluso wrote it.
And he had some standing, right? A former government minister.
He did, which gave his claims weight. He stated point blank that types of flying discs were designed and studied in Germany and Italy as early as 1942. And he speculated maybe some great power was testing them. That got people talking.
Definitely. And then you get specific individuals making claims, like Rudolf Schriever.
Ah, yes, Schriever. In 1950, he told Der Spiegel magazine he'd designed this circular aircraft, like 49 feet across, with rotating turbine blades, while working for BMW in Prague towards the end of the war.
A flying disc.
Pretty much. He claimed he fled Czechoslovakia and his plans were stolen.
But then...
Well, in another interview with Der Spiegel, just 2 years later, he apparently gave a different story about when and where the plans were stolen.
Inconsistencies. Not a good sign for credibility.
Not really, no. It muddies the waters around his story quite a bit.
And there was another guy, Georg Klein, who came forward around the time Avro Canada was showing off its Avrocar project.
That's him. Klein claimed in 1953 that these circular designs weren't new, that they were actually developed during the Nazi era. He even described 2 types.
2 different Nazi saucers.
According to Klein, yes. One was supposedly a non-rotating disc by a Richard Meath, who Klein said worked on the V2, was captured by the Soviets, but Meath himself escaped to the U.S. and worked for Avro.
Okay.
The second was the Schriever design, but Klein attributed it to Schriever and a Klaus Habermohl in Prague. He claimed it had moving blades around a fixed cockpit, and get this, Klein said he actually saw it fly in February 1945.
He witnessed a flight.
He claimed it reached high altitude and speed. Pretty extraordinary claims.
But the evidence, does any of this hold up?
Well, that's the problem. The Wikipedia article points out there's really no proof Meath worked on the V2 program. Klein's story of Meath escaping in a Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, that rocket plane is basically impossible logistically.
Okay.
There's no evidence Klaus Habermohl even existed. And Schriever's claim he worked for the aircraft company Heinkel, also uncorroborated.
So lots of claims, very little, if any, actual proof.
Pretty much. It seems like Schriever, maybe Klein too, might have been, let's say, embellishing things after the war. Schriever apparently kept claiming foreign powers were after his designs.
Still, there was that British technical mission chief, Roy Fedden. He seemed to think the Germans were onto something unusual.
Right. Fedden's comment in 1945 is interesting. He led the team looking at German tech after the war. He said some late-war German designs were the only things that approached the capabilities people were attributing to flying saucers.
And he warned about entirely new and deadly developments if the war had gone on longer.
He did. He mentioned Germans working on several very unusual aeronautical projects, but didn't specify flying discs. So his comments lend some credence to the idea of advanced, unconventional German research, but not necessarily proof of working saucers.
Okay, so that covers the early phase speculation rooted maybe loosely in actual German tech. But then things take a sharp turn in the 1960s, right? Into full-blown conspiracy territory.
Yeah, that's when it really gets tangled up with occultism, secret societies, aliens, the whole 9 yards. Fringe writers started connecting the dots in ways that went way beyond just advanced engineering.
And suddenly we get all these alleged code names. Rundflugzeug, Feuerball, Haunebu, Die Glock, Vril. The list goes on.
It's quite the collection. And these names and designs start appearing in, well, everywhere. Model kits you mentioned, Revell actually made a Haunebu kit for a while.
They did, until they pulled it due to historical inaccuracy complaints.
Right. And video games like Wolfenstein, X-Plane. These fictional or semi-fictional craft have really permeated popular culture.
It shows how powerful the imagery is. Where did these specific ideas, like the Haunebu or Vril craft, come from initially?
Well, the Wikipedia page notes some accounts popped up as early as 1950, perhaps inspired partly by real German research, maybe misinterpreted, like Victor Schauberger's work on vortex engines, his repulsine.
And these later conspiracy theories, they often weave in actual historical facts, don't they, to make them seem more plausible?
Exactly. They'll mention Nazi Germany's Antarctic claim, New Swabia, and the real expedition there in 1938, Or they'll point to the documented research into rocketry, or the Horton wings, or that weird-looking Archer-SAC AS-6 plane.
It anchors the fantasy and reality, sort of.
It creates a blend. You take known facts, add speculation, and maybe some deliberate invention, and you get a narrative that can sound convincing if you don't scrutinize it too closely.
Let's look at some specific examples. That 1960 book, The Morning of the Magicians, that seems key in linking things to the occult.
Yeah, Pobles and Berzier's book really popularized the idea of the Vril Society in Berlin being involved in mystical quests for power and potentially advanced technology.
And later writers just ran with that.
Oh yeah, people like Jan van Helsing, Norbert Jürgen Rathofer, Vladimir Dzerzhinsky, they built on that Vril Society idea, explicitly linking it to developing UFOs.
And the story gets pretty wild, doesn't it? Alien contact, building spaceships to meet aliens.
According to these theories, yes. The Vril Society, sometimes supposedly working with the Thule Society and the Nazis, wasn't just building advanced aircraft, but maybe even communicating with extraterrestrials and trying to build craft to reach other worlds.
And what happened after the war in this version of events?
The narrative often involves them escaping defeat, retreating to a secret base, usually in Antarctica.
Yugoslavia.
Right. And sometimes even going to the Hollow Earth to link up with some advanced inner Earth race. It's elaborate.
It's a potent mix. Secret societies, lost tech, hidden bases, aliens, Hollow Earth. It ticks a lot of boxes for conspiracy buffs.
It really does. You see these common themes recurring: hidden knowledge, powerful secret groups, escape from catastrophe, the promise of ultimate power or salvation.
Then there's Ernst Zundel. He's mostly known as a Holocaust denier, but he dipped into Nazi UFOs, too.
He did, yeah. In the 1970s, through his publishing house, Samizdat Publishers, he pushed the idea that flying saucers were actual Nazi secret weapons.
Operating from where? Antarctica again?
Antarctica again. An underground base, naturally. And the goal wasn't just escape, but eventual world conquest, maybe even conquering other planets.
Seriously. And didn't he try to sell trips to find the entrance to the Hollow Earth?
Reportedly, yes. For a hefty price, you could join his expedition to find the polar entrance.
That sounds opportunistic.
There are claims he admitted privately it was just a publicity stunt, a way to get attention and maybe funds, though he apparently defended the ideas publicly later on. It's murky.
Okay, moving on. Miguel Serrano. A Chilean diplomat, but also a Nazi sympathizer.
Yes. Serrano wrote a book in 1978 called El Cordón Dorado, Hitlerismo Esoterico, Esoteric Hitlerism.
And his take was?
Even more mystical. Serrano claimed Hitler was essentially an avatar, like Vishnu, communing with Hyperborean gods in that underground Antarctic base.
Wow.
And that Hitler would eventually emerge leading a fleet of UFOs, the Final Battalion, to establish the Fourth Reich. It's blending Nazi ideology with mythology and the UFO theme.
It's quite a synthesis. Okay, one more specific device mentioned. Die Glock. The bell.
Ah, Die Glock. This one gained traction more recently, largely thanks to Polish journalist Igor Rutkowski around 2000, and then Nick Cook's book, The Hunt for Zero Point.
What was it supposed to be?
A top-secret Nazi device.
Yeah.
Descriptions vary, but it's often linked to Nazi occultism, maybe anti-gravity research, free energy, some kind of Wunderwaffe, or miracle weapon.
Sounds very sci-fi. Is there any actual evidence for the bell?
Mainstream historians and scientists are pretty dismissive. The consensus, as reflected on the Wikipedia page, is that the claims are largely fictional, maybe based on misinterpreted rumors or even deliberate hoaxes.
So, like the specific saucer designs, there's no solid proof Die Glock actually existed or was built.
No credible evidence, no. It's become a popular element in fiction and speculation, but its basis in reality is considered extremely weak to non-existent.
Man, what a journey. From pilots seeing weird lights to Hitler communicating with Hyperborean gods via a giant bell in Antarctica.
It certainly covers a lot of ground.
And it's undeniable how much this stuff has seeped into popular culture. We mentioned games and models.
Right. Heinlein's early sci-fi novel Rocket Ship Galileo had a Nazi moon base way back in 1947.
There was that Nazi UFO Easter egg in the Medal of Honor Frontline game.
The whole premise of the movie Iron Sky is Nazis attacking from the moon with flying saucers.
Revell's Haunebu II model kit controversy.
The Haunebu craft and Wolfenstein II. Even Commando Comics featured the Schriever Flugkreisel.
And it keeps going, mentioned in the TV show 30 Coins just recently.
It just keeps popping up. It shows the idea has real cultural traction, whether people believe it or not. It's become a kind of modern myth or legend.
So wrapping this up, what are the key takeaways for you, our listener?
Well, first, there was genuine speculation during and right after WWII that some unidentified aerial phenomena might be advanced German tech. That part has a basis in the historical context.
Right. Given things like the V-2 and jet fighters, it wasn't an illogical thought at the time.
But then, those initial, somewhat grounded ideas evolved over decades into these really elaborate conspiracy theories.
Adding layers of occultism, secret societies, hidden Antarctic bases, even alien contact.
And it's crucial to separate the documented German aeronautical research, which was advanced and included things like flying wings, from these later, much more fantastical claims about operational flying saucers, Vril-craft, Die Glocke, and Antarctic empires. The evidence for the latter is just not there in credible sources.
Despite the lack of proof, though, the imagery, the idea of Nazi UFOs clearly persists in books, films, games.
It definitely captures the imagination.
Which leads to our final thought for you to chew on. What is it about this specific combination, the Nazis, secret advanced technology, UFOs, the occult, that makes it such an enduring legend?
Why does this particular narrative, blending known history with the unknown, secrecy, and immense, perhaps forbidden, power, continue to fascinate us so much? What does its persistence tell us about our own hopes, fears, and maybe our relationship with history and technology?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into a very strange corner of history and myth.